So, pain policy. Where does pain policy come from? Maybe in the future, pain policy is informed by the ICD-11. And why? Let's look a little bit at the background, the context, at the features, and then at the pain-specific aspects. And you will see what likely the impact on pain and pain policy could be. So, all of you know that ICD is an international standard. This means it's implemented in some kind of 110 countries, and in many countries it's used for mortality, in many others for morbidity. A new application is the quality and safety that becomes increasingly important in the whole context, and ICD-11 also is useful and usable for primary care now. Healthcare costs are driven by the ICD, and the progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals are monitored with the ICD, not to talk about the clinical documentation and related algorithms that check substance interactions and other aspects that are relevant. So ICD is there already in many countries, and the move to ICD-11 will open the door to all these kind of different features that the ICD-11 has. So, as I say, it's used in many countries, for many languages, with multiple healthcare systems, and by multiple professionals. So data coming from all these different sources can be used to do statistics, to do analysis, and to inform policy. Of course, we shouldn't forget that ICD also covers different cultures and different resource settings, and this is the reason why in some instances we have more detail or less detail that we offer to the users, so that they are not pushed aside or taken aside by the complexity of the classification. Now, also ICD is not standalone. Many of you may know, others may not know, that we have this kind of family of classifications. I will not go too much into detail here, but just to point out, we have here colorful in the middle the reference classifications, and in ICD-11, for example, the second one, the ICF, the functioning classification, is linked into the ICD with the functioning properties, allowing some basic assessment for functioning. This may be pain influenced, this may be influenced by different other aspects. Then we have this ICHI, the classification of health interventions. Also that one is linked into the ICD and related to the ICF to have matching interventions for these aspects. So we have a whole framework of information standards that fit together. Nevertheless, we will have derived classifications. You see here on the right hand on the screen a range mentioned: oncology, many may know; mental and behavioral disorders, many of you will know, and there are others that currently exist in ICD-10 and that will continue to exist in ICD-11. But they will no longer exist as standalone products maintained by one people or two people over a short while and then they vanish, but they are part of this ICD core structure and are really derived also technically from this. So we are no longer talking about different books, but of a harmonious network that allows different levels of detail. And while you look at the derived classifications, you say, why isn't there pain mentioned yet? Well, at the moment it's not there, but that may be an option for your discipline to have a pain-focused version of the ICD-11. Just for matters of completeness, of course, we have related classifications, means they are not necessarily derived from these core reference ones, and they cover other areas that are relevant in health. And here is the overall picture that you may also have seen in the past, where we say ICD with its bridge to terminologies and with the embedded detail that you can also use instead, will allow to reuse the data without much complication for all these different levels. And you see here population health, clinical, administration reporting, all this information will influence policy. The ICD maintenance is another aspect that should not forgotten in this context. The maintenance is done on a permanent platform online that is open all the time and also is open to everybody to propose improvements. So if in the process of the data collections and the analysis you identify necessary improvements to the classification that would inform policy better, well, an update mechanism will make sure we can also update bits and pieces in the future. Of course, there are limitations. As said earlier, number one, we have deadlines, and number two, of course, there are certain updates that you can do within one revision of the ICD, and certain other updates are too complex to do them in one revision, and that's where we need a new revision. Also, the ICD-11 is flexible enough, and I will show this later, so that we can understand what comes out of this. Here we see a maintenance process and the proposal flow. You see the blue dot points that are representing the different proposals. And of course, you will have a filter function at the beginning that checks a little bit completeness. But you will have these different committees that will look at the different uses of the classification. And here is something that is new compared to the past. In the past, the medical scientific advice was coming through individual member states and their related centers. And of course, sometimes this could mean that you have two conflicting advices because specialists in different countries may have different ideas. Now we have said we'll have a central body, the Medical Scientific Advisory Committee, that will deal with these issues, and there will also be somebody who can look at the whole thing from the angle of pain, making sure that updates to the classification do not compromise the quality of information of the ICD. Here are the timelines, and I think you have heard this from the previous presentation also. The timelines do not last forever. So here in this year, we are doing quality assurance at different levels, and we have a release version that we want to release in April, May. And this clearly means that we have deadlines, as said earlier, in the meeting, by end of June for the member state comments. We have some detailed field testing that may move bigger chunks that is due by end of June. And then we will have input coming from scientific reviews and testing in September, but there we can change detail. We cannot rechange the structure. On the other hand, we should also consider that international working groups have been working on the different areas. In the area of pain, I think it were 5 or 6 years. In the area of ophthalmology, it were 10 years. We should assume that the basic structure is okay, and we may be dealing with clarifying a definition, adding some detail, switching some things on and off, but not making a revolution. Now, what does the ICD-11 do? Let's think of the policy. The policy needs to inform by good information. Currently, the ICD-10 has the problem that it's really difficult to use, as rules and bits and pieces are scattered all over the different volumes. And who reads the manual? People are using the classification as they think. That, of course, means that the coding is not always done in the same way. So we have a better usability. We also have a better index. We can incorporate the ICD in a more smooth way in electronic environments, and you will see later in this presentation in what that impacts the quality of data and the feasibility of detail that you can have. Not to say that we have updated scientific content. You have seen this, I think, earlier. And the biggest thing is also the linkage to relevant other classifications and terminologies, one of which, of course, is SNOMED. Finally, a thing that you may not be aware, an ICD code does usually supposedly mean the same, although we have identified in a few areas that it's not the translations haven't been always as optimal as they should be, and talking about things like, for example, the inactivity syndrome. It turned out that a country had a totally different interpretation and had 3 times as many cases dying, for example, of that disease than countries with a comparable population fraction. Now, what were the issues with ICD-10? So besides the structural one, you see here a whole range like pain or antimicrobial resistance, HIV, skin cancer, plenty of problems that appeared in the ICD-10 that couldn't be dealt with in the classification. And there were other bigger things like cystic fibrosis, the classification of diabetes that was overly complicated, lymphomas, outdated external causes, missing detail, and mental health moving forward in science, but the ICD didn't. So these things need to be addressed. And we still have here the problems with the indexing and code ranges that are covered different. And no tooling for maintenance, no proper tooling. So the more standardization means the updates, means the comparability internationally, and it also saves money. The saving money may not impact on your policy, but this comparability, the national and international comparability that improves with a correct translation of titles, with people using the same schemes, that will really help. A big example for those of you working in the field of psychiatry, for example, you will know with the ICD standardization in mental health, with the definitions that were added, with the special version for clinical guidance or research criteria, the handling, the definition, and even the diagnosing of the relevant conditions have been standardized to the point of allowing comparison between different countries and regions, thing that wasn't easy before. So in ICD-11, the same for places like in pain, where this detail has been provided, it can help to standardize the reporting at the diagnostic level up to the coding level so that you can draw on larger basis for studies than maybe you could before, that you can even draw in part on routine data as much as they're collected in a standard fashion for the analysis. Now, looking a little bit at the detail, I hope this hasn't been shown in the earlier presentation, but I don't think so. Here you can see the screen, how this looks like on what we call the online browser of the ICD. Whoever is interested in this, I'm not showing a QR code because you all know Google, and if you Google ICD-11 browser, you will get to that page. And here you see a range of things that are features of the ICD. So on the left side, you see a kind of tree structure, and they just have opened up one place to the level of detail that is there. So the chronic cancer pain, for example, I chose this one, and you see here the outcome of the work of the working group with a description, with additional information, and then even with some diagnostic criteria. There are other things that are visible here in this tab that you see here on the top: foundation, linearization. There are everywhere question marks. I'm not going to explain too much detail there, but if you are interested, just click on the question mark and you will get information. And there is even a video and other things. Please don't forget to register yourselves. Now, looking at this again, we have a foundation and a linearization. Foundation means that below the level of the things, of the classification, of the things that get a code, there is something more. There's a whole network of roots under the earth or under the surface, or as we said earlier, under the shoreline. So there is much more detail that can be addressed. And if we, for example, look at this in detail, you see here the chronic cancer pain, that's where the classification ends. But the chronic cancer pain has things like the roots that goes down to chronic visceral pain from cancer. And so it can be addressed either with an individual code in the specialty version, and then there would be a digit edit. So means currently the code ends at MJ40.21, and in the specialty version one can consider adding one code. The other point is, do we need this, or do we have special environments where I have the detail and I have machines helping me, computer software supporting me in the coding, so I can even use the thing that is marked with this big blue arrow that says URI, Unique Reference Identifier, or marked also as Foundation ID. With this identity ID, everything in ICD can be coded to that level of detail. And if you want, you can code the chronic visceral pain from cancer independently of your national requirements, say national requirements, cutting up the coding level at MJ40. We also have what we call a coding tool. This is what you see here. I hope the size allows you to see a little bit what you have on the screen. Where you enter a term, you find here a word list with associated terms and destination entities. And on the right side of the screen, you see even filters by chapter and the number of hits. The most elegant thing is somebody has been looking for pain and wants to code pain, and in that case, they go to what is marked there in light blue in the middle one with a small asterisk, say, this is the closest match. If you have nothing documented but pain, you go here. But if you have more, then you go to the pain by site, by type, to chronic, and you can combine more terms, and that you get to the more specific pain forms that you may be interested in. Then the alternative views. I said this earlier. So would we have a neurology specialty version, a pain specialty version, a rheumatology specialty version? Let's see. At the moment, as long as you have logged into the system, these are the range of different versions you can look at on this browser. Sometimes there are some asterisks in form of codes. This is because it is still under development, the technology itself, but the content is there, but you may get an idea of what, for example, you could do for pain, and see here at the bottom the dermatology specialty linearization, just to give you an impression what can be done there to optimize the data input, to optimize the data collection so that you get information to improve health, in that case, in the field of pain. So if I look up pain in this browser, this is what you can see if you enter pain. You see here the different types, and it's similar to the coding tool, but at least you get an overview at any time. What is new in the classification? Now, I've talked earlier about the diabetes in ICD-10 that was so complicated because it was subdivided, number one, by types, nice to have, and it was further subdivided by a wonderful construct that was saying with ophthalmic complications, with vascular complications, with kidney complications, and then with multiple complications, and then complication unspecified. The problem was in the reporting that in many places the detail reported didn't allow to do specific coding. The other problem is, of course, that, well, there is rarely a diabetes that has only one organ system affected, but mostly multiple, so in the end the data couldn't be used properly. And with that said, we said, well, in that case, it's much better to be more specific and just say, tell us the diabetes type and the specific kind of complication, and the rest we do with the data analysis. And this is what you see here on this screen, where you see, for example, diabetes mellitus with diabetic retinopathy, and where the first part of the code is identifying the type of diabetes, the second type, the diabetic retinopathy. With this way, we can combine many things in more detail, and as you may guess, we can certainly do the same for pain. Just to illustrate the principle, we can call this post-coordination or cluster coding, that's why the term is there, where we can combine multiple codes for one disease, codes that are stem codes, and also codes that are extension codes, so additional anatomical detail, additional substance, perpetrators, context, many things that we can do there, where we say, for core statistical purposes, this level of detail is too high to be included in the core classification, but from a clinical context, this may be very important detail and should be available, and whoever has that detail usually also has a software that supports this so that code combinations can be used. And here you see a kind of an orgy of code combinations. I went to the breast cancer, chose the malignant neoplasm of breast, and if you go there in the browser, you will see this red marked post-coordination thing, where at the bottom you have a range of things that you can click through, and one could add, for example, also pain there, meaning if I have a bilateral carcinoma of the breast, the code combination is the one of carcinoma of breast, the 2C70, plus this more complex code for the laterality. Now, if I had somebody with chronic cancer pain, well, I can make one code string that is composed of the 2C67, 70, the long thing, and with a slash indicating also that there has been chronic cancer pain in that context. Of course, the fact of being able to report this in the context of a patient will depend on the local setup, technology-wise, and also on the national requirements, because from experience, in many instances, people would use precious clinical time for coding only for things that are absolutely crucial, in particular for reimbursement. That's a thing that you need to bear in mind. But on the other hand, with this system, you have the option of adding this kind of, for example, types of pains to all the different conditions, even if they have a side thing in the analysis. If related to one case, you have this detail added, you can analyze all the data and say, okay, I'm not interested in the cancer, I'm not interested in the laterality, give me all the cases that were mentioning the MJ4022, and off you go. You can identify cases that had this chronic cancer pain. So in the end, ICD-11 and pain, in what will it influence your policies? It allows for coding much more detail. It allows for combinations that didn't even exist in ICD-10, and it allows for more clarity thanks to the definitions that are there. I can only say, see to implement ICD-11 rather soon. Start preparing now. Give us your comments. As was said earlier, I think participate in the testing so you get acquainted with the system and try it and start using it. Thank you very much for listening, and over to you.
Thank you.